seamless transition of discussions that have taken place in Toronto over the years. Let's talk about postmodernism and Marxism.
Yeah, which sadly is one of our major exports now, from what it seems. It's like I've always said, Canada for the last couple of years has had a bad habit of exporting, three things: maple syrup, pretty shitty pop stars, and for some odd reason, bizarre far right white people, mostly either blondes or old men, who have a lot of nasty things to say about cultural Marxist conspiracy theories. It's like our three primary exports. Those three and only those three, and hockey. There you go. So number 4.
Yeah, well, there you go. I at least. I haven't grown up, as I always tell people, about an hour and a half north of the nearest Canadian border crossing in Windsor. I do at least appreciate the last export, even if I deplore all the other ones. But
you not like maple syrup? I mean, that's almost
no,
like
I like maple syrup just fine.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That's the you've seen Canadian Bacon, right?
Sure. I have, yeah. Actually, it's I think it's Michael Moore's most underrated movie. I mean, I'm kind of biased because obviously, Canada's a little brother syndrome when it comes to the United States, and for a director to make a movie just about an American invasion of Canada is kind of like, wow, there's that in the South Park movie. But there's that one scene where they're doing the propaganda. And it's like maple syrup sleeping down through north.
Yes, that's what I was just thinking of. Because they're listed off the anti-Canadian propaganda commercial. They just list off all the Canadian actors and directors working in Hollywood, and it's talking about Canadian immigrants seeping down our borders like maple syrup. But yeah, that's good stuff. So one of the things, there's a lot of really good stuff going on in this article, which is of course why I invited you on to talk about it. But one of the things that you talk about at the very beginning that I really appreciated, just because it's like a really simple point, but it's not one that people often make in this discussion, is so you talk about Jordan Peterson and Hicks, right? He's the I think the other main guy you're talking about in that first part. And these people sort of push this like postmodern neo-Marxism narrative that postmodernism is a kind of like disguised neo-Marxism or something like that. And you point out there's the sort of narrative that some of these guys put forward that says that the reason why this postmodernism was come up with, and actually as I'm saying this, thinking of another, thinking about this comic novel by Jane Smiley, I think called Moo, where there's a line about everybody knew that deconstructionism was just Marxism in hiding, waiting for a moment of national weakness. So that's an old novel. So I guess the idea has been around, but this idea that like French intellectuals felt the need to be like stealthy about their Marxism because that had become so toxic for some like Cold War reasons, or because of the crimes of Stalin, or whatever. So they had to like sneakily hide it as postmodernism. You point out
they all watched that PragerU for Kids video with Solzhenitsyn is the idea, right? And little ghost of Stalin went around and was like, off to the gulag, and they're like, I can't handle that no more. We're just getting rid of that.
If you didn't watch Postgame last week, you don't know what he's talking about. We will clip that eventually, but I will say that that's not a joke. It's not an exaggeration. Like literally, the ghost of Stalin in this PragerU video is saying things like "off to the gulag," exactly like that. It's amazing. Yeah. And one of the things you point out in the articles, if you know anything about French political history, this is a really weird thing to claim.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the kind of bad habits that a lot of these Anglo authors have is assuming that their kind of Cold War anxieties were present and ubiquitous everywhere, including in other developed states, right? And if you look at continental Europe, there were viable socialist parties there all through the 20th century, and violent Marxist parties as well, and communist parties, all of which made central contributions to the formation of the European welfare state, and that played active roles, even in coalition governments with more moderate forces. So one of the things that I point out in that article is actually around the time when apparently this big shift occurred, according to Peterson and Hicks, and also I should add people like James Lindsay, right? Actually, you had what was considered at the time to be a radical socialist in power, Mitterrand, in France throughout the 1980s. And he did so in coalition with the Communist Party and made no bones about their desire to engage in a pretty aggressive policy of decapitalization. Now, unfortunately, if you know anything about the history of the left, this was more bark than bite, and Mitterrand never
Right.
really went forward with this kind of radical transformation, at least as stated. He made some efforts, so I'm not saying, slam the guy, but never went through with it. But the kind of reason I bring this up is this notion that Marxism as a brand was so toxic around mid-century to late century France. Really just doesn't have any kind of currency. If
Yeah,
anything,
I mean, for
one of the
for
easiest things they
anybody
could.
who missed this detail, right? Like one of the things you just said is the high point of postmodernism. The Communist Party was in the governing coalition. I don't think this is a place where people were afraid to call themselves Marxists.
No, not at all. And again, one of the things that's really irritating about it as well is it was hardly out of fashion to be a Marxist intellectual through mid-century France. I mean, some of the most prominent intellectuals that people like Foucault and Derrida were inspired by and criticized, people like Althusser, Sartre, proudly identified with with Marxism, were naturally critical of the Soviet model, as many were, or kind of leaned into it too heavily in some circumstances. If you're Althusser, but it was a very respectable intellectual position to take, still is in many circumstances, right?
Right.
So to understand their critiques of Marx or their kind of withdrawal from the Marxist framework, you can't just make these kind of cheesy historical narratives that, again, so everybody read Solzhenitsyn and then just suddenly en masse became a convert and decided to leave the Communist Party or the socialist movement. They decided to withdraw from Marxism for philosophically and politically subtle reasons, many of which, by the way, I should say I disagree with, which is the other half of the article, right? Uh, but they're reasons that are worth pondering for their own sake, if you're a leftist or you're a critical theorist. And sadly, of course, the Stephen Hicks and the James Lindsays and the Jordan Petersons of the world just aren't really interested in doing that. And I don't want to say it's a shame because my expectations are so low now that they're never going to go about doing that. So there's no point in having any expectation that they'll do so. All we're going to get is what we got a few weeks ago, which is what prompted this article. Just this random barrage of tweets every now and then being like, so people keep on bothering me saying, I never read any of these people. Well, here's a list of postmodern neo-Marxists. We'll add Foucault twice for good measure. And then we'll also add Catherine McKinnon, who wrote a piece called Points Against Postmodernism and said that postmodernism will destroy the feminist movement wholesale because she's an exemplary postmodern neo-Marxist, right?
Yeah, and I should say, like, one thing that I like about this is that, so even out of leftists who might dislike or disagree with post-structuralist philosophy,
I know you're a big fan.
yeah, yeah. Well, right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you moderated a debate that I did with Charles Wolford on this channel, where where I ended up getting like way too irritated by the end of the debate.
Yeah, I had
So
no idea Richard Rorty, just the name of the specter of Rortyism was such a trigger for you because I just could see you like, no, must cast it back into the oblivion from whence it came.
yeah, right. Which is unfair. I think I think politically, Richard Rorty is like a pretty honorable social democrat, and I think
Yeah,
that he was and I certainly think he was a good writer. I just think he said a
yeah.
lot of silly shit about philosophy. That's my that would be my that'll be my balance.
Well, hey, look, I would
On
agree with
Rorty.
you, and I feel the same in many cases about Derrida and Foucault, even though I think that there are insights in their work that are worth keeping. So,
Yeah, no, fair enough. And this is what I was going to say though, right? Because it's like, so anybody who watched that debate knows that, like, my sort of attempt to be fair about this in the debate was to just sort of say, look, you, Charles, right, clearly know this literature better than I do, right?
mhm,
So if I think postmodern thinkers are saying something, you say, no, that's not what you're saying. I'm just going to believe you. And like,
mhm.
I'll react to whatever you say that they are saying, right? I'm just going to argue against some things that I think are maybe there, and then you tell me if I'm getting it wrong. Um, but I think that, but I also, but one thing I appreciate when I read you about this, and I read you this article, is that you're somebody who, even though I think you do. In fact, I'm sure you do. Right? Um, share a lot of my sort of like big picture ideological, points that I would make about this.
Yeah.
Uh, but one, your reading habits are better than like anybody I know. So like you've read all of this shit, and you're able to do this in a way like, look, I mean, I've seen you write about like, Patrick Deneen, who I think is a lunatic, and do
Well, you should read
and like
Adrian Vermeulen, right? If you think Deneen is out there, then you're just dealing with the gentle honey whiskey. You haven't even gone for like the full fucking 100-year-old Scotch yet.
nice. Yeah. Well, I did read Adrian Vermeulen in the Compact, which is this new magazine I wrote about for Jacobin. I'm actually having you and our friend Sam Adler Bell back in a few days to review a debate involving one of the co-founders, Sora Barbari. But at the first day of Compact magazine coming out, and whatever, it's like a weird project in a lot of ways, but
Oh
there's
yeah,
certainly people on the masthead I don't dislike. But
yeah. I mean,
they
I like Ashley Frawley, and I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about Slavoj Žižek. So
yeah, of course, right. And I don't think they actually agree with the main editors about the things I was criticizing in the article.
Mhm.
I'm actually fairly certain they do not, but they have but I did read on the first day they published a piece by Adrian Vermeulen where he was criticizing like mainstream conservatism, and he used this phrase which just like he was like pouring derision. He was like talking about like the sort of like normie cucky conservatives, and he says the same old and he says the same old dogmas about, and he trots them out. And it's like free markets, free speech, and free use of drones. And it's like wait. Roll back the tape. Take me to that one in the middle, right? That's not like the other two, right?
yeah,
How is free speech on this list, right? And, but
yeah.
that tells you something about Vermeulen, right? That he's willing to just come right out there and say like, I don't like free speech. I don't like the separation of church and state. Which I mean, I guess you get some sort of points for honesty.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you read his work, actually, I have a review coming on Arc Digital of his new book, Common Good Constitutionalism, pretty soon, which is very comprehensive. Let's just put it that way. But look, he's very straightforward, where he says that uh, we're working within liberalism, kind of like a parasite or like a virus. And our goal is to overturn it from within. And when we do overturn it, then what we're going to replace it with is effectively something approximating an integralist state, right? Which is a nice way or pretentious way, depending on who you talk to, saying a kind of Christian or Catholic theocracy, right? With a couple of free market features. And if that sounds appealing to anyone, then my feeling is, have I got a great country for you? It's in the 1930s. It's called Franco Spain. You probably really, really get a rise out of being there. For the rest of us, I think that sounds awful, right? But I
Yeah,
will give
no,
him points for candor. Like, not a lot of people, like Deneen, is wary of going that far. I think because he knows that if he starts to specify some of the things that he wants, people will just be like, don't want to. And Vermeulen's just like, yeah, let's just do that.
yeah. I mean, good luck. Good luck with that is all I can say. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're willing to just sort of like maybe like impose it by judicial fiat or something. Like they have we're living in a time when in the Republic of Ireland abortion and gay marriage have been legalized by popular referendum, and I don't and the United States is a country where like Catholics aren't even a majority. I don't know what the plan is to impose all of this, but in any case, my point being that look, I see you write about people like this, and you're still like reading them really carefully and being fair and all this stuff. And so certainly, like when you're talking about postmodernists,
Yeah.
in this article, you're definitely tried to be really careful in how you present the ideas, and you're not even doing the thing that I probably fall into sometimes, where I'm just like, look, view from 10,000 feet. Here's what Marxism is about. Here's what postmodernism is about. These things are clearly pointing in different directions. What the fuck are you people talking about, right? Like, which is
Mhm.
how the sort of crass way I would do it, right? Like, but instead you'll be like, no, look, of course there are certain threads of continuity you can pull. That it's not like there's no, influence from any like idea from the Marxist tradition on any of these authors. Of course there is.
Mhm.
It'd be weird if there wasn't, and you can sort of you're like unpacking all of that in ways that I think any reader who is sympathetic to that tradition would be like, okay, he at least knows what he's talking about. And that even if ultimately, I mean, I think you do as you should, basically like, um, science and enlightenment values and
Yeah.
and all that good stuff.
No, absolutely right. And I mean, like you, I think it'd be very foolish to say that there's no integral connection between post-structuralist thought and Marxism. And part of the reason, again, and this is contra the Peterson thesis, is because there was a very powerful Marxist intellectual and political movement in France at the time that stamped more or less everybody who was in the country. Right? To say that Marxism didn't have an impact on a left-wing guy like Foucault or Derrida would just be absurd. Right? It'd be like saying Reaganism didn't have an impact on you, Bane. Right?
Right.
Clearly it did. But I mean, the impact was complicated and for the most part negative, right?
Right.
Derrida once wrote in a piece saying that he was carrying on in a certain spirit of Marxism. Foucault had several nice things to say about materialism, and at one point in an interview, he even said that Discipline and Punish was his attempt to go in a more materialist direction than some of his early works. But, Derrida just also emphatically said, I am not a Marxist, right? A certain spirit of critical theory and Marxism isn't being a Marxist.
Right.
Foucault was once even nastier and just outright said that Marx was dead, boring 19th century economics, is the translation I read, right? Not exactly mincing words.
Which is fun. I've actually been teaching a class at the Michael Alberts thing, School for Social and Cultural Change, about capital. We've been going through the first few chapters, which are definitely the part that critique applies to the most.
Yeah.
But I still think there's gold in there. But anyway, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, anybody who's read Das Kapital knows that, holy fuck, like, you just sit there and you're like, I just do not care about how many textiles 19th century.
How many yards of linen? Like, I
don't. Like, just spare me, right? I mean, even David Harvey, I was watching his lectures on Reading Capital Volume 2, would say, like, there are parts of this volume that are, like, really dry, like deserts that you have to walk through to get to the oases. So be prepared for that. I'm like, oh God, if you're saying that, But look, I mean, I'm broadly speaking very sympathetic to the Marxist project, far more than I am to the post-structuralist project, in part because I think that Marx anticipated most of what was valuable in post-structuralism, but systematized it better. And the kind of novel features of post-structuralism, Derrida and Foucault and Deleuze, they mostly got it from sources that I think are bad, people like Nietzsche and Heidegger. And those elements toxified a lot of what was good in their work. Right now, we can get into the details about that. It's pretty technical, although I do think it has political ramifications. But my feeling is that I'd be very happy if we took the insights that we find in some of the post-structuralist authors, some of the stuff about power that you find in Foucault, some of the interesting things that Derrida, for instance, has to say about logocentrism and philogocentrism in political language, and then more or less went back or to a kind of rejuvenated universalistic project that avoided the imperialist pretensions of earlier ones. So I'm definitely an Enlightenment guy, right? I just like to see myself as a mature and reflective Enlightenment guy. Let's use that term.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.